St Kilda and their potential trade and draft strategy in 2025. Now, they've just come off one of their worst losses for the season against the Dogs. A pretty poor performance, and it probably did highlight some of the holes in that team. But also, I think there are a lot of things to look forward to and a lot to be optimistic about in the future for Saints fans. So we'll get into all of that as well. So the Saints probably have one of the more unique list builds in the competition for me, just the way that their talent is distributed. And that's not necessarily a bad thing. It's just perhaps different to what other teams do. I think heavily in the draft over recent years, they haven't necessarily gone for that prototypical just general midfielder. They've looked for dual position players, players that are flexible. They're able to play different sorts of positions and also have a kind of a vast array of different athletic types. If we look at some of their probably most highly talented players over the last few years that they've brought in, Philippou, Nasiah Wanganeen-Milera, Darcy Wilson, Machito Owens, and then you've got Travalia, Tyroo, these sorts of players. And then probably with their just general sort of midfielders, they've gone with later picks in the draft who are probably players that aren't necessarily the most talented. I'm thinking about players like Windhager, maybe Garcia, where they're just really good role players that they've still got sitting there to develop for the future. But if we look at those front-ended players, Nasiah Wanganeen-Milera, Darcy Wilson, Matthias Philippou, there definitely is a leaning to the outside types and not necessarily those inside midfielders, which I think for the here and the now, that's leaving a little bit of a gulf in class in a really important part of the field. That current midfield that's on the park at the moment, you're talking Jack Macrae, Jack Steele, Zach Jones, Jack Sinclair. That's a lot of Jacks in that midfield, actually. Jack Sinclair's the other one who's a really highly talented player, but he is over 30 and he's one that probably has his primary position still behind the ball if he's in his best possible position. Zach Jones is another one that runs through there. So there's not a lot of quality in there. And at the moment, we're going to go through the younger players that possibly could play there, but they haven't really drafted like a primary on-baller that can sort of come in, play straight away and get some midfield minutes and really dominate in there. So we'll look at the players in the draft that they could look to given this gulf. I think when you talk about the outside players around that, you've got some players that can play those, halfback roles in those outside positions, but then some of these guys that they have drafted will be able to move into the midfield in the long term. So we'll go through that and unpick it all. So before we make any decisions on this, I think we need to talk about the players that they already have and the younger players in particular that are coming through that we can sort of put in the book here as what I would call bankables. They are the players that have shown enough talent to be considered likely at least that they're going to have big AFL careers and they can play sort of these primary positions for St Kilda. The first one on the list for me who would fit into the almost a generational type player when you look at the athletic type, the physiology of him, and then the football ability that he has as well, and the points of difference that he has, I think, on other midfielders potentially. So I'm talking about Matthias Philippou. He just has to turn into a big-bodied inside midfielder for me. He's got running ability, he's got pace, he's got movement, he's got agility for somebody that size, pushing the 190 centimetre mark. He also has that ability to push forward and be a real headache inside forward 50 as well. So many different angles to his game. I think at the moment, he's probably projecting it at something similar to a Will Day type player. He's more that sort of, he's not a big-bodied sort of tall midfielder. He's more of that slighter-bodied guy that moves really well and hurts you in the air as well. But I think points of difference on Philippou to add to that are probably his kicking as well. So he's one of the few players inside that midfield currently that can really use the ball well. He's got that piercing left foot kick that he can sort of operate and dictate with it. And he's got a lot of different types of kicks that he can use as well, that around the body one. He can sort of pump it long. He's very dynamic and direct as well. So lots to like about Matthias Philippou. He's one of my favourites. Just got to get him back in the team and get his body right. Nasiah Wanganeen-Milera, I probably don't need to touch on him too much, given the heights that he's already hit. He's one of the best kicks in the competition. Do I think long-term he's going to be an inside midfielder? I don't necessarily think you want to use a player like Nasiah Wanganeen-Milera in an inside role. I think how he's operating across half-back, and as long as you can push him closer to goal, so he's actually using the ball to kick the ball inside 50, I think that's probably where the trajectory lies. He still definitely has some improvement. I think at times he doesn't take the most intelligent kick all the time. Like sometimes he tries to bite off a little bit too much, but that's also a good thing when he can, really, really break the game open with one of those kicks as well. But an unbelievable player and definitely someone that is big with the future for St Kilda. Let's hope he doesn't go to Adelaide. I'm assuming in this video that he doesn't. The next one I've got is Mitch Owens, who is that sort of a potential big-bodied midfielder. I don't really like him in that role. I don't think he has the fine skills, can release those little handballs that inside midfielders really need. I don't think maybe his ground level skills are quite at the level that a midfielder needs as well. Some St Kilda fans will disagree with me on that. I think he operates best as a sort of pseudo tall forward. I think his physicality there and his ability to just compete in the contest aerially is his main thing. And then he is really good at ground level. I don't think he's necessarily midfield level, ground level, but he is really good at ground level for a 190 centimetre plus guy. So I think he's definitely in that group of really highly talented players, and he's put down enough performances that you can sort of call him a banker. Max King is another one that I've got in this group, still only 24, so he's still relatively young, particularly for a key position player. I think really with Max King, it's just about the body, right? He needs some continuity. He often gets criticised when he comes back in the team for some of his sort of aerial efforts, I suppose. But I think when he does get some continuity and some trust in his body, the talent is definitely there and the physicality is there. Darcy Wilson's an absolute star. We've seen that pretty much since his debut game. He's a serious runner. He's a serious overhead player. Probably haven't seen the ability to go inside yet as well. And that's probably the risk when you draft a lot of outside type players. You don't get those sort of bankable midfielders. I'm not going to bank him as a midfielder in that next sort of crop, but I think he's definitely one that could make that transition. Liam Henry is a superstar as well. He's got elite pace, elite agility, and elite endurance. He's one of the few sort of really zippy, quick type players that can play probably as a small forward deep, but he can also get up the ground and play that high half forward role as well. So he's going to be super important for the Saints, as is Cooper Sharman, who's still only 24 years of age as well. Sort of, I guess, slowly getting there as a key position forward target. If he's able to be there next to Max King for the long term, I think the Saints are going to have a really combative, competitive tall forward line that with Sharman, I think you get a little bit more at ground level than you do with somebody like a Max King. So I think, that's a real positive, and he's a real hard worker, can sort of get a little bit higher up the ground. Not necessarily play close to goal, but when you've got the potential of Mitch Owens, Cooper Sharman, Max King, I think that's a really top-end forward line for the future. So in all honesty, this is a pretty tidy group of what I would call bankable players. Now, what I call bankable it's not even that great of a word to describe it, but I guess the players that have shown enough high-end talent, at least for a sustained period of time, that you can sort of trust that they are going to be able to make it at the AFL level, at least athletically, and they're going to be probably above average. So that's my group of those players. So the next group of players I've got to bring up here are the players that are either sort of too young to know whether they're going to be those players, whether they could transition into being really top-end, high-end players, or they could be those sort of, I guess, just role players and just solid players that fill out your best 22. At the top of this list, I have Isaac Keeler. I think the jury is still out on Keeler, whether he's going to be, a top-line player. But as a key position player, I think he's really handy for the Saints to have just sitting there. When he has played at AFL level this season, I think he's looked pretty good. Still need a bit more time on Keeler. I feel like with Keeler, though, he's going to be one of those guys that's either a star or a flop. I don't know if there's any middle with Keeler. The next one I've got is Lance Collard, who's played a little bit of football as well. Everything that I've seen from this guy is really high-end to be that dynamic small forward player. I think he's a bit of a hybrid as well. He's got that aerial ability to go with it, so it gives him a point of difference on other small forwards. Again, the sample size for me at this stage is just probably too small, but I think he could be a really high-end talented player for the Saints. Toby Travaglia, I project this guy as a high-end midfielder in the future, but again, he's just been drafted. We don't really know. We haven't seen enough of him at this point. He's gone back to the VFL last week and he's got some touches. I think he's going to be great. I think he's going to be a midfielder long term. We just need to be able to see it. Angus Hastie's another one that's sort of come in and out of the side. Probably more likely for a Hastie. I think that it's going to be more as a role player, not necessarily as a highly talented player, but still one that has to be considered. Tyrue's in that same group as Travaglia, where you're just not really sure. He was drafted as a bit more of a mercurial key position defender, someone with a lot of athleticism, but hadn't necessarily put down huge performances. But I have big hopes personally for Tyree. I know some people don't, but I think that competitiveness that he shows makes him a real bankable player for the future. Ari Schoenmakers is another one that's been in and out of the side. I don't really know where he sits for me. He sort of always looks like he's maybe carrying a little bit of extra weight for me, someone that probably needs to get a little bit fitter just to get himself like really cemented into this team. James Barrett's in that same group as the draftees, Alex Dodson, Patrick Said, Hugh Boxall, Max Hall, that mid-season draftee as well, and Angus McLennan. So probably as I go down that list and you get into those later draft picks, less likely that they're going to be absolute stars and more likely that they're going to be those sort of role players that just fill out your best 22. And then the last ones are those, I suppose you could say that they're more certainty to be role players just because they've been in the system for a little bit longer, so we've had a longer time to look at them. I think Windhager, I think Garcia, I think Burns, Community even as that sort of lockdown defender at the moment, is probably just showing a little bit. I know he's been poor in a few games, but they're probably players that have played enough AFL games now that they can make it at the level, but they're probably not going to be high top end players at the end of the day. Maybe the jury's still out on Garcia. I'm probably going a little bit early on him, but he does look like more of a defensive option, I suppose, than a really offensive option. So I actually think this is a pretty simple equation for the Saints. They need midfielders, they need quality midfielders, and they need them to be able to come in and make an impact a little bit earlier, less sort of project players, more bankable type midfielders. I think they need some size and some physicality in there, and they need to be able to, in the relative short term, phase out those guys like Jack Steele, like Jack McRae, like Zach Jones, and bring up the quality. We know they already have Matthias Philippou as that. I guess he is a taller, bigger body in there, but I still do think they need a bit more physicality around the likes of Travaglia and the likes of Philippou, who don't necessarily have that out-and-out grunt in there all the time. So currently they hold pick 7 and 43. They don't have a second rounder in this draft. Pick 7, where do I think that's going to end up? Let's assume that's a little bit higher than that. I think it will get down to about pick 5. That's where I have the Saints. Now, I know Saints fans are going to get annoyed at me for that as well, but I do see them dropping just a little bit in the season. I think their inconsistency in performance has already showed that, and I think the lack of quality in this midfield will catch up with them eventually. So we'll say, just as a marker to put down here, that they will hold pick 5 coming into the national draft. Now, obviously, they need midfielders. You can go to the draft or you can go to the trade period. Is there any chance that St Kilda bring in somebody, one of those big midfielders that's kicking around, a Harley Reid, a Zach Butters? It's possible. Does St Kilda have the picks to execute that at the moment? Well, if they did leverage, say, a pick 5 in this and then they put it with a future first, I guess you'd be starting to look at a player. 2 first-round picks is starting to look at a player, something like Zach Butters. I'm not sure if they're going to go down that route, considering they are big in the market here for a TDK. So they bring in TDK. I assume that facilitates a move to play somebody like a Rowan Marshall a little bit more in the forward half of the ground. Marshall is also 29, so he's not necessarily with this group of players that we're talking about to sort of lead them to the next premiership. I'm not retiring Rowan Marshall at only 29, but he's probably got, 4 or 5 years left at the AFL level. So they'll be looking for that, next Rowan Marshall, which I think TDK, one of the best young ruckmen coming up in the competition. So they just need some midfielders to build around him, and they'll be doing great. I think if they do get TDK over the line, it's less likely that they're going to be in for someone like a Harley Reid or a Butters. I don't really see a world where St Kilda bring through the door Harley Reid, TDK, Zach Butters. I just think that's going a little bit overboard and a little bit dreamland for the Saints, obviously, but I just don't think they're going to be able to get it over the line. So what I think they'll be doing is bringing in one of these top-end midfielders in the draft. So let's look at some of the names. If you were to have the top 5 pick, I think the first one that you're looking at from a real upside point of view, but you're probably buying into that similar strategy that you've done in recent years, which is a Willem Dersma. He probably fits that mold similar to someone like a Matthias Philippou, where he's highly talented. Physiologically, he's an absolute specimen, 191 centimeters, moves like a gazelle. I don't think they'll go for a player like that, and he's probably not going to be available with a pick 5 where St Kilda are going to be sitting anyway. So I think the players that they want are just the most bankable sort of midfielders that they can get their hands on. Now, they missed players like Josh Smiley, Harvey Langford last year. There is another one of those sitting right in this range currently, and his name is Oliver Greaves. Greaves is an extremely similar player to Josh Smiley. He's 191 centimeters, a little bit shorter, but he has that big physical body. He's a heavy body. He's someone that dominates the space at stoppages. He's able to use his force to push guys around, protect the space of the ball, and then release teammates. He's also pretty good on the spread himself. He's not super fast. As I said, he's a big sort of heavy body. Can look a little bit immobile, but he does have low-key, pretty handy agility and spreads well. So I think he'd be one that the Saints would be sniffing around. And when you look at throwing a Toby Trevallion, who's a really good runner in there, and Matthias Philippou, it's a tall midfield, but it's got some balance as well. They'd probably need one other fast-footed midfielder. Whether that can be Hugo Garcia down the track, that's probably a question mark. But they can still go for someone with one of their later picks or into next year's draft as well, with those sort of fast feet at the stoppage. I think if they're looking for pure disposal and control, they'll be looking at a player like Josh Lindsay. This guy has a little bit of the Scott Pendlebury's about him. He started off as a halfback distributor, so he has that awareness, that time and space. He's come into the midfield, averaging high 20 disposals, and he just uses the football so well by foot. You'll look at his stat sheet each week and it'll be 20 kicks, 5 handballs. So he's that sort of player. And he reminds me a bit of Scott Pendlebury in the sense that he doesn't necessarily have speed or rapid agility or explosiveness or any of those sorts of traits, but he just sort of does it with his mind. He's a high footy IQ player. He sort of steps in and out of traffic, and players just seem to struggle to get their hands on him for whatever reason, the way that he thinks, the way that he moves. So I think as just a general all-round midfielder, I think Josh Lindsay would be a really good shout for them as well. At 183 centimetres, he doesn't have the same height and the same reach as someone like a Scott Pendlebury, but I think he reads the game in a similar way. And the last one that I want to bring up here is Rory Wright from the Sandringham Dragons, another 183 centimetre guy. He doesn't move in the same way necessarily as someone like a Josh Lindsay, so kind of cerebrally, but he does have that sort of competitiveness and that power to sort of push through players. And one of the points of difference of Rory Wright is the ball use as well by foot. So a beautiful left foot kick. He sprays passes around. He hits targets inside 50. He can kick around the body, all of those sorts of things. So again, not a lot of athleticism in Rory Wright. You're not getting the sort of the speed there, but he is a strong player and a very combative player, and someone that I think if you want a bankable character, has that competitiveness to go to the next level. The last one that I'll bring up for them, and it's one of my favourite players in the draft, it's Sam Grill. This guy has all the speed in the world. His agility is amazing. He played in a Vic Metro, Vic Country trial match at the weekend, and the way that he just stepped around players was frightening. He's so direct. He goes straight at the goals at all costs, and he just wants to get the ball moving forward all the time. As I said, he's really quick and he's got those fast feet. So I think he's probably someone that's coming from a little bit further back than some others, in the sense that he wasn't playing in that predominant midfield role. He was playing off halfback in his bottom age year. He has the traits there, but he probably just needs to clean up a few things on the inside. That'll push him up the draft board. But I can see from a physiological point of view and an athletic point of view that he's pretty close to being there already. I think he's a really underratedly composed player as well. He just seems to make the right decisions all the time. He's got good ball control. He's got good little handballs in there, in tight and close as well. So big raps on Grill, and I think the Saints could do a lot worse than pick him up with their top pick in the draft. So that is a wrap for the video, guys. What do you think of the draftees that I put on the table for the Saints? I'm not retiring these guys like Steele and McRae and Jones and these sorts of players just yet, but I do think there is a lack of quality in that midfield, and they're going to have to get them sort of moving on at some point in the future if they want to make this side a finals pushing side and a top 4 side as well. So let me know what you think, guys, and I'll see you in the next one.